But he does issue for us an invitation, both in the present to share in his life as a foretaste of what is to come, and also as the telos, another Greek word. Our destination is to become like him and to share his divine life. The image of God is imprinted on each one of us, and that's the definition of life's being sacred. Every life is sacred, regardless of what the person does with it. And that's a foundational principle for all our ethical decision making. But we become sanctified, we become holy, primarily by the work of God, to which we have to add our efforts as well. Something just changed. Did the volume just change somehow? Okay. I don't, yeah, it's fine. I was just joking with Father Seraphim and Marta. One time I caught Douglas recording one of my sermons here, and I snatched the recording from him because I was afraid that someday that would be used as evidence in a heresy trial. But now that we're streaming everything anyway, it's a moot point. So all life is sacred, but we're called to holiness, which requires our effort, an ascetical effort of prayer and fasting and all of the things that we are celebrating during this period of Great Lent. Very simple foundational principles then. So what we have to do is bring those principles into contact with the issues of life and death that we find in this life. We can affirm that God is absolutely sovereign. He has control over all of life, from our conception, through the course of our lives, to the grave, but even beyond the grave, into the kingdom which is to come. And the presence of the Holy Trinity in our lives is the model, if you will, or the icon for how we're supposed to relate to each other, inasmuch as they are three persons of equal essence. They share the divine love among each other, as we are called to share love among each other. So the tension for us then is between that understanding and how we're supposed to make these decisions. Our confession of God as sovereign Lord and our celebration of that conviction in the worship of the church is the ground for our Christian moral theology. The problematic of moral theology, which produces these ethical dilemmas at every stage of life, is caused by the conflict between our confession of those fundamental principles and what the fathers of our church called our passions that lead us to sin and to separation from God. Nobody is exempt from this struggle, because as St. Paul reminds us in his third chapter of the book of Romans, all have sinned and have come short of the glory of God. In our secular age then, this age in which we're living, the discipline of ethics has been cut off from its theological roots. The world we're living in now doesn't believe the stuff that we just talked about. It's a completely secular world. We're living in what is called a postmodern world of relativism. But whatever, regardless of what the world, the flesh, and the devil tell us, it's our job as Orthodox Christians. We must begin and end with the conviction that Jesus Christ alone is the way, the truth, and the life, the ground of and end of every ethical action that we take. And we affirm that as reflections of the Holy Trinity every time one of our litanies in the church ends with the prayer, "Let us commend ourselves and each other and all our life unto Christ our God." Just to revert a little bit to what we talked about last night, one of the teams asked the question about confronting people who don't believe like we do. And he was concerned that he didn't have enough facts to argue with people who don't share his Christian faith. And my response to that was, the only fact that we need to know is our relationship with God. Our experience of God is what we're called to bear witness to. And in terms of truth, we don't compile a whole bunch of facts and put them all together in a book. For us, truth is the person of Jesus Christ himself. So when we're making moral decisions then, we've got some very specific guidances in Scripture and in the tradition. We all know the Ten Commandments. What we may not know is that there are actually two versions of the Ten Commandments in the Bible. We're more familiar with a set that comes in the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter, but they also recur in a different form in the 5th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy as well. We have the Beatitudes, which Jesus gave us, again in 2 sets. Matthew 5, and repeated in a slightly different form in Luke 6. Jesus gave us some very specific teachings, especially around issues of marriage and family life. We've got the writings of Paul and the other apostolic writers. We have at our disposal the canons of the church and the teachings of our bishops and the authority of the liturgy itself. And these things are all guidelines for helping us make ethical decisions. In the present day, major ethical issues about which the Bible and the church tradition may not have had anything to say whatsoever, the scriptural writers could not have had any notion of contraception in our church. They could not have anticipated the challenges of IVF or in vitro fertilization. They certainly didn't have access to anything called physician-assisted suicide. And there are just a host of other things that even these good sources that we have could not have addressed. So we have to add to this tradition that we've got, we have to add our own conscience, which is built into us to help us make these choices based on our theological principles. And we have to apply something called discernment. I don't know if the word is pronounced diakrisis or diakrisis. Who knows the Greek better than I do? I think it's diakrisis, the word for discernment. Again, St. Paul tells us that our, especially in the 1st chapter of Romans, we have this innate sense of what's right and wrong. Every human being has that, but we have to develop it. The first and last decision we need to make in any ethical decision or situation or choice is the decision to submit our moral deliberations to Him who is the head of the body, with a single-minded concern that whatever action we may take in any specific situation will be to His glory and for our salvation and for the salvation of those who He has entrusted to our care. Those are our principles. Questions, comments, complaints? You're too easy. All right, let's talk a little bit then about issues surrounding the first stage of life, issues of procreation and of conception. Okay? There was a wonderful book that came back out in the 1990s called The Concentration Can that had a lot to say about IVF, in vitro fertilization. And a man by the name of Donald DeMarco made the following observation in that book. He said, "It's a curious thing to observe the excitement many geneticists express over the mere prospect of increasing man's intelligence." And then in quotation marks it says, "They express no desire whatsoever for increasing man's humility. Insufficient intelligence, however, has never been a serious human problem. In fact, many of our problems are associated with intelligence that is separated from and isolated from its saving graces of humility, understanding, and wisdom." As a reference also to a notion of procreation, from the book of Jeremiah, God says to the prophet, somewhere between the 7th and the 6th century before the birth of Christ, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations." From the perspective of Orthodox Christianity, all research on human subjects, including what is known as ESCR, embryonic stem cell research, ESCR, should be guided and limited by the Christian understanding of the human person as created in the image of God. That's in comparison to, or in contrast to, this postmodern pluralistic world in which we're living. And when we state that position, the world will typically look at us as being somehow sectarian, or retrograde, or narrow-minded, or even absurd. But in spite of the kind of opposition that we may face from the world, we're still called to bear witness to what we know to be true and hold to be true. Just as a sort of tangent here, the notion of living in a postmodern world Originally, to be postmodern, when it was first coined, it was meant to be an abandoning of modernist trends. But over the years, that has shifted so that now when we talk about something that's postmodern, it's relativistic. You can believe anything you want. Nobody has a right to tell you any different. Everybody's got their own relative values. When we talk about a postmodern world, it's not our rejection of absolute and objective values and truths. So, for instance, if I happen to believe that life begins at birth, when a child emerges from its mother, then there are no moral consequences whatsoever of disposing of a fetus. The same might even be true for someone who was disabled or someone who was terminally ill. These things were all sort of reinforced with the prevailing law until very recently, instituted by the Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade. I think this is the first time that Bishop John went down to the March for Life that Roe v. Wade had been overturned recently. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. In fact, I think, Sandy, you gave the opening prayer at the March for Life this year, right? Okay. So that was the beginning of life. And then at the end of life, back in the 1990s, there was something called Oregon's Measure 16, which authorized physician-assisted suicide. And I really had no idea precisely how timely this topic was going to be until very recently. And you may be aware in the news that the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama has decided that those embryos that were created in IV fertilization, they have personhood. And that's going to set off a whole chain of ethical and political decisions in the not-too-distant future. In fact, there's legislation flowing through a number of state legislatures right now. So that's the idea of being in a postmodern world. But this is not a new problem for us. It would be a very worthwhile Lenten effort for us to go back and read some good literature, especially the writings of Dostoevsky. If you've never read Dostoevsky, this is your time to do it. Go out and get yourself a copy of the Brothers Karamazov. It's worth reading. But he made the observation in a previous century, without God, anything is possible and anything is permitted. Without God, ethics are merely what's useful, what's guided by expediency. And sometimes those decisions and choices in our culture are strongly influenced by economic interests as well. You know, we were driving this morning down 128, and 128 is just filled with these biotech industries all over the place, and they're making a ton of money. So there's a lot of economic interest in how we approach these ethical decisions. When we operate then under the law of the markets, there is in fact potential for wonderful therapies, but there is also potential for terrific abuses as well. When industries and people claim that an embryo is nothing more than mere tissue, then you can do anything you want with it. I will grant that there is tremendous potential usefulness for embryonic stem cells in creating medical therapies for a wide range of neurological and other diseases. For instance, there's a lot of progress in the areas of Parkinson's and of Alzheimer's. But what's the rub in using embryonic stem cell research, ESCR? In order to use those embryonic stem cells, you have to kill the embryo. You have to take its life. Now, the principle for us here is another one stated to us by St. Paul in the third chapter of his epistle to the Romans. He asks in a kind of response to his critics, and well, I'll read you the quote, and then you can know what I'm talking about. He asks, "And why not say, 'Let us do evil, that good may come of it'?" Because there were people who were saying that in his day. And he responds rhetorically, "Let's go out and do evil, and then we'll see what comes good of it." So the basic principle here is that we're not permitted to do evil so the good may come from it. That's what governs the church's approach to these questions. All right. Let me skip the rest of this just in the interest of time. I know I'm talking too much. So those principles come into play, especially around issues of IVF, in vitro fertilization, ESCR, embryonic stem cell stem cell research, even issues of cloning. And one of the problems that emerged in the Alabama case, I don't know if you've been following this in the news, is that there was a storage facility where they had a bunch of frozen embryos. Families had put them into cold storage, so to speak, so that they could implant them later and bring the babies to term. Well, what happened was there was some kind of industrial accident. The embryos perished. And the courts decided that those were human lives that had ended. Well, as soon as that took place, it set off a firestorm of politics on both sides of the spectrum. Some on the left were using it as an opportunity to affirm their right to what they call reproductive rights, which is an interesting term because really it's an argument in favor of abortion. Okay, and on the right they were backing off this notion of life beginning at conception, so that they could continue to support the possibility of IVF and of other therapies. Okay. Our basic conception there, our basic notion of conception is then that life begins when the sperm hits the egg. Because once that has occurred, everything that is necessary for a human person is in place. Thanks to the research back in the 1950s of a couple of scientists by the name of Francis Crick and James Watson. They get all the credit, but there was actually a woman involved in the process as well who doesn't get enough credit. Her name was Rosalind Franklin. We know that once that fertilization takes place, all 23 pairs of chromosomes are there in the structure of the double helix. And scientifically, we can say that that's when life begins for us. There is a possibility, however, of doing stem cell research without embryos. There's something called adult stem cell research as well. And those stem cells are available from a woman's placenta, from the umbilical cords, from human blood, from bone marrow, even from skin, fat, brain tissue, and of all places, baby teeth. So it is possible to have some kind of stem cell research without harming embryos. I happen to have a brochure from Waltham, Massachusetts. I was talking about all the research that takes place up here in New England on these kinds of issues, on something called intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Well, here's the deal. What this doctor claims to be able to do is to take one single male sperm and inject it into one female egg. Okay? Hence, that would get rid of all kind of complications in multiple births. Exactly. And you have to worry about fetal reduction or choosing ones that are the best possibilities. Just do one. The problem with this technology is it doesn't work as well as other forms of IVF does. More importantly, especially we were talking about the economic factors, it's expensive. So you're taking a chance when you're going that direction. Now it's time for you to do some work. I'm going to give you a pastoral scenario, and you're going to discuss it. Back when Father Seraphim and I were at seminary at St. Vladimir's, God rest him, Father Joe Allen used to come on a Friday afternoon. And he would lay out a situation, and we'd have to discuss it. All these theological students, these third-year students who knew everything already. And they would often be joined by her daddy, Dr. John Dalek, would come and share the time with Father Joe. So you're going to have a pastoral scenario today, and you're going to get to chime in here a little bit. And I'm going to ask some specific questions for you to address. Here's the situation. A faithful Orthodox couple from two very faithful Orthodox families were married in an Orthodox wedding. In short order, they gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who was named on the 8th day, churched on the 40th day, and baptized soon thereafter. The beautiful little girl, however, is soon discovered to have a blood disorder, which will require regular, systematic, and permanent therapeutic infusions in order to sustain her life and assure her vitality. You got the situation? Okay. The doctors tell these faithful parents, that a perfect genetic match could potentially provide the stem cells to implant in the girl necessary to alleviate her condition. For example, if the couple were to have another baby, the sibling's DNA might provide the necessary cells through a bone marrow transplant. So I've got two questions for you then. Should the couples have another baby for therapeutic purposes? The harvesting of the cells would come from the second baby's pelvis. The second question is then, can the parents make the decision to provide those cells when the second baby reaches the age of 1? Did the parents have the right to make that decision on behalf of the baby? Discuss. I'll ask the questions again. Should the couple have another baby for therapeutic purposes to become the source of the necessary stem cells? And secondly, can the parents make the decision to provide those cells from the 1-year-old baby on the baby's behalf? Brendan? It's okay. I'm going to ask you to walk around for people who want to respond to this, okay? All right, we come to a conclusion of any kind? Brendan's going to walk around with a microphone to anybody who wants to address either one of these questions.
I'll be like.
Let's start with Valerie.
Remember Phil Donahue?
You are Phil Donahue. Go get it.
He used to run. I won't run in.
Valerie wants to say something.
We were saying if the family had another baby, for the first question now, that would be, they had another baby, whether it was on purpose, scheduled, or, accident, unplanned.
Unplanned,
But not go out and say, let's have a solution to this medical problem and let's make a baby. So that's just for the number one question.
Okay, take a shot at number 2. Do they have a right to use that baby without its consent to be a donor?
If it was my baby, I would.
Okay. Yeah.
So you make the decision. If I, as a mother, made decisions all the time for my 1-year-old children at the time. So what is the difference with this? The child is born. It's interesting. Joyce, you should mention about what you said about that God gave them the situation to begin with. So why don't you, so God gave them that first child with that, and also gave them that situation to reckon with. So I didn't see any problem with having another child. You're responsible for their upbringing, just as you're responsible for your first child, you're responsible for your second and third and whatever goes on and on. So you want the best life for that child anyway. So you make the decision to do what you have to do to lengthen that child's life.
Okay.
There are no guarantees with the second one anyway.
No guarantees, you're exactly right.
But if this couple is so upright in the church and in their beliefs and everything,
I hear
they'll
you.
do the right thing.
That's why I wanted to stress that at the beginning. Go ahead, and it's behind you, Brendan.
We go in the back.
Hi, Carol from St. George Cathedral. I agree with everything Marilyn said. All right, the only circumstance I would see is if they have the second baby, and that baby is also born with blood disorder, then you have a problem. But other than that, Marilyn's right. We make all kinds of decisions for our children, not just at 1 year old, but as they are grown-up teenagers, whether they agree with you or not. So now, I don't know what the church feels about that ethically.
You're the church, so speak for the church.
But-
Now, Carol, they've come to you. You're the pastor. They're asking for your input, so speak to them as the church.
Well, I don't think I can do that because I'm not sure what the priest would say, to be honest with you.
Right?
But I feel I want to save my child,
Okay.
and the only way to save it is to have their siblings save them. And so that's how the three of us felt about that.
Phil, you got another opinion over here, too.
Yep.
One of my thoughts is what my values are as a family, I impart with my children. So if I teach my children that life is sacred and that standing up for the truth is sacred, then just like Sophia with her children, we will step forward and proclaim Christ whether or not we are martyred. And so if I want to teach, if that's the value in my family, then I will teach my children, we will do whatever it takes to preserve life. And so that would be the decision that I would make. My child is yes, this is a decision they will make whether they're 1 or whether they're 15 to save the life of someone that they love, if God calls them to save their life. So that's my thoughts.
Okay. Brendan, we can go back across the
Just
the
like we
aisle.
make the decision to baptize them.
Well,
Right?
just on that point alone, there's actually a penance for parents who fail to baptize a baby, and if the baby dies. There's actually an exclusion in the canons from Holy Communion for, I think it's 3 years. So that's an important point that you just made.
There's one more, Marilyn?
Marilyn. It's the kind of thing that will need to be treated perpetually. She would, not to my knowledge, no.
Thank you.
I understand. Correct. It's therapeutic, but not mortality. Right. Chronic, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Violet.
First of all, I agree. If that was my child, I would certainly want to save that little girl's, my daughter's life, and I would approve to have the child, the 1-year-old, have the bone marrow transplant. And along with what Marilyn said about having, a 1-year-old has lost, until the parent is responsible for making decisions for the child. But I'm going to throw a little wrench in this. What are the chances that the second child will not have the same blood issue? I didn't catch that.
I don't know the answer to that. Only God knows, right?
That wasn't part of the equation.
Hi. I agree with the ladies about the parents taking responsibility to take the decision for their children. Doesn't matter if they have the blood disorder or not. We always take decisions for our kids. And for the second child, I would say it's great if we have the second child and can help. And we don't know if he's gonna be sick or not, but it's great to take a chance and have a family. We always, as a Christian family, you're saying that this family, I'm sure they love to have kids, not only one, and not for the reason only to help the first child. So this way we can take a chance to help the first child and raise both the same thing and love them, and maybe they have more kids. And as a parent myself, we always took decisions for our kids when they were very sick, and we all parents had sick children, went to the hospitals, and went through so much to raise our kids the best. So I don't think they're gonna have the second child just only for the purpose of helping the first child only. They're gonna love the second one the same as the first.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
I saw a hand over here,
Anyone else?
a couple of
Yeah.
hands. Two more, Brendan.
I'm not as fast as Phil Donahue was.
I think what struck me is that this is sort of an opportunity to lean into prayer, especially in relation to the discernment you talked about before, and also stepping back from instrumentalism, that like not seeing other people and things as a means to an end. But the prayer is, you know, as other folks have said, do we want to have a bigger family, period? Like regardless of help to the next child. But then also you get a year down the road. I thought it was interesting that it isn't, you know, at 2 weeks old, it's a year. This is now another human being who's growing and living, and, you know, sort of always being in that state of prayer to discern what are all the factors going on. Everybody's asking questions about, you know, what are the other variables that we are adding to this? God knows. And so this is where we're sort of always leaning there and not seeing others as a means to an end.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Mike Coulomb, ask if Father Seraphim was going to say something.
Thank you. What I observed, though, is some of us were answering the question, does the parent have the right to make that decision? What Father Michael asked is, what is the right decision? So, yeah, the parents can do whatever, they have the legal right to decide for their kids under 18.
Even a moral right.
Even a moral right. But is it right to say, I'm having you so that I can use your parts to fix my beloved daughter?
That's exactly it, right on the nose. That's exactly it. That's the complication. And the reason that I wanted to walk through that little scenario is just so that we get a sense of the kinds of things that the clergy, bishops and priests alike, are called upon to comment on. But it also requires an informed laity to make these kinds of decisions as well. And it's not only what the church would say in any given situation, because you all are the church, after all. It's not only the hierarchs and the clergy, but we're all in this together. And that goes back to the other principle that's at stake in ethical decision making. Our choices are supposed to reflect the inner life of the Holy Trinity. We live in community the same way that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit live in community, and we make those choices together. Often, in these kinds of ethical decisions, there may not be a right or wrong answer. There's a difference between a moral choice, where there's a clear black and white, a clear yes and no, and an ethical choice, where we may need to choose between better or lesser solutions, and we try to make the best decision we can in any given situation. Okay? I'm going to move ahead a little bit. It's already 5 minutes after 12, and I want to get to my screed. This little thing that I'm going to get on my soapbox about. It's a big complaint, a loud one. Okay. But I want to solicit your opinions about something, and this is sincere. This is not planned. I'd like to solicit your opinions about a couple of things happening here in New England. I'm wondering if you're experiencing the same kinds of stuff that we're experiencing a little farther south from here. Earthquake, well, I was sitting in my office at 10:20 yesterday morning, and the ground started to shake. It sounded like a Sherman tank was rolling down the street. And my poor secretary had never experienced anything like that. She goes, "Father Michael!" She's screaming for me. "Relax, it's going to pass. It's going to be okay." It was quite an experience, though. We're noticing that our kids are confronting in the public schools an awful lot of LGBTQ plus stuff. I don't think that's news to anybody here. We're all aware of that. My question is, on an ethical basis, how do we respond to that with respect to our children's schooling? There is, of course, a big movement, even in our archdiocese, for homeschooling. Take them out of those environments where they are exposed to these kinds of attitudes and values and protect them. There are other people who say that we ought to be putting together Orthodox schools to have the right environment to raise our kids in. There's a third class that says our kids are ambassadors of Christ. We need to send them out into the world to be witnesses towards what we believe to be true. So this is an honest question. What's sort of the attitude towards public education in particular here in New England? Oh, we're shaking our head over here. Brendan? Sorry. Your sister gets first shot.
I don't think we have enough time for that.
No, it's okay.
We don't have enough time. I work in a private school. My son goes to a private school, and there's a reason for that.
Well,
no, I don't know.
Oh, gosh.
yeah.
I do think about that last option as far as being, out in the world and being ambassadors of Christ. But you have to, I think at an early age, they have to be trained. What are we training them in? And it's, you look at, thank God in New England, whatever church we belong to, there are services throughout the week and, the different feast days and also, it's not just a Sunday morning. But regardless, even with all that, think about all the hours that a child spends in school and then how much time they spend in church and how much time they spend at the home church, let's call it. I'm happy, we live in a town. We moved there during COVID. I'm very happy for my son to engage with our neighbor kids and the Cub Scouts and baseball and hockey and this and that and the other. All the town stuff. That's his opportunity to exemplify. He's not a little apostle yet, if ever. But thank God the school we have him in. It is a Catholic school, and he's learning the essentials of Christianity, and where that particular school he's in, they put the religion piece isn't incidental to it. It is it's absolutely essential to the whole thing.
Okay.
And we love that community, and he's being trained in goodness and morality and all of that, and then he can go out in the world and thank God. We're blessed that he is the way he is, and so going out in the world, I think that's important. But being respectful, and we're surrounded. We're literally surrounded by it, for whatever way, and so it's I think that it's setting the example of what we believe. Every once in a while you have to talk about in the negative of we don't believe that because, but I think having a very full and robust positive of what we believe, I think is the best antidote. And not, because at some point they're going to encounter a nice person who subscribes to some of these other thoughts. And then they'll be like, oh, they weren't so bad. And it isn't a question of the other person being bad. It's that what we have, we talk about, we have the full truth in this church.
Okay.
So,
All right. Again, Brenda, we're going to chase you the whole way across. Let's go here to the middle.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm from St. Stephen's in Ludlow, but so my children are all grown, and I just worry about my hopefully soon, potential grandchildren. It's hard. I mean, even them in their 20s growing up, I felt that they were, we taught them and that they were ambassadors. But now I just think that education has such a powerful pull on our children, and they are not being taught what they should be teaching them is the basics. And I just feel that it would be nice to establish Orthodox schools to have that option for people. But what about and then homeschooling? I kind of feel like if my children had children, I would have to be a mother because I get concerned with their future.
Homeschooling was just beginning when we were raising our own kids.
Yeah, it wasn't a thing when and especially in the area that I live in. But it's definitely it is a concern, and so I don't know.
The conclusion that we came to when we were raising kids was either we would kill them or they would kill us.
Yeah.
We weren't going to do any homeschooling. It just wasn't going to work.
But it is good that people have that option if they can do private school.
Yeah.
Joan and then Richard.
Go ahead, Joan. Our educators are going to speak. Yeah.
I'm a public school teacher. I teach special education. I'm also a product of Public Schools Canada. And all my kids went to public school. And I do believe that they're ambassadors out into the world, and that we set the foundation at home to help with that. But I can tell you that the public schools, at least the ones where my kids went and where I went, are not scary. That especially at the elementary level, we're teaching about social emotional learning, we're teaching about how to get along with people, we're teaching all those different kind of things. So I'm not sure, I don't have the exposure, what you're saying, that's all these negative things happening in schools. The other, so for my kids and for my family and where I grew up too, is that we would, we would take Holy Thursday off. We would go, I grew up in Canada, our church was across the border, we'd go across the border, we'd go to the Holy Thursday service, we'd come back and we'd go back to school. And so we would, and I'm still doing that as a public school teacher. I'm taking Holy Thursday off. And I go to church, and they all know that at the school. All the other teachers know that at the school, that, oh yeah, it's Holy Thursday for Joan, so she's not going to be here. But anyway, ambassadors.
Yeah, I was going to go to Richard.
An educator, but a school administrator.
What's instructive is this conversation. The issue is adult education. We don't have conversations about this. So whether a child is homeschooled, whether it's an Orthodox school, a public education, or a form of private education, there's always ways that kids learn about what's going on. Many of us have lost our own children attending church because we don't know how to have conversations about things. Kids come home from school, where'd you get that from? Or they go and play with their neighbor kids and they come back and they have all this information or ideas. And so the key is the church and church finding ways to educate adults so that we become conversational. There are many issues politically that are going on in society today. There are multiple issues here. Our college campuses are divided because there's no sense of conversation even going on there. And we're not going to, it isn't public education. it's all education is dealing with these issues. It's convenient to make public education the scapegoat for what's going wrong in this country.
Richard, let me just interject along your lines here. I think you're right. Adult education is critical. And aside from a once-a-year retreat like this, I'm wondering what the forum is for providing that adult education. Because, I'm sorry, when I have an adult education class, the mass of my people are not there. It's always that small, sort of faithful remnant that comes. So what's the forum for our conveying those kinds of values to adults?
One answer, just one. Time is of the essence. This is just one example. In one of the workshops that we had, I mentioned that for clergy during liturgy, the sermon or homily is critical. And you have your 10 or 12 minutes to reach an audience of generally people who are faithful attendees of the liturgy. Those have to be well thought out and a message, because that's the one time you have a captive audience. The other, whether you have, when you have adult education, time is of the essence as well. And so you have to find suitable times other than clergy. So part of adult education is educating a cadre of laity.
So train the trainers.
Train the trainers, get a cadre of laity who have the gift for understanding the theology and educating adults.
Right, thank you.
And every parish has numerous people like that.
Yep.
And let's try that approach.
That's an outstanding suggestion. I said one more hand on this side, and then I'm going to move on a little bit.
We had Gus had his.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Few issues, actually. I was talking to Sayedna about this specific. I have two girls. One is almost 9, the other one is almost 7. And we had an issue at school last year. They got us suddenly a non-binary teacher, assistant. It was sudden. And everybody complained. We found one issue is, it's so easy to come and talk, complain, but nobody addressed it. Fear from precaution from the school or any, I'm not sure why no parents approached the administration. And then my wife ended up going, and she spoke to the principal. She was like, listen, we come from a Christian family. We respect everybody, but we cannot really accept this topic brought into our children at this age. My daughter was 5 and 6 at that point. And nobody speaks out. That's our problem. We complain about it between each other, but we don't come out and talk about it. And I think we need the support of the church to stand behind us, because we're not only facing families and stuff, we're facing governments and political people left and right that are supporting this. Even though they don't agree with it, they're supporting it. I don't know why. And this is a major issue. We cannot speak by ourselves. And our kids, we teach them as much as we can, but we need, as Richard said, we need to be taught more so we can teach them more.
Okay, very good. Thank you. What I'm hearing then is that this is a universal problem. It's just not New York. We're all facing the whole thing. Okay. Brendan, you did great.
Thank you. I should have brought my
You
sneakers.
did great. I'm impressed. God bless you. I'm sorry, we're going to call you back. We got one more.
Who's that?
Right in front of my wife.
Okay.
My mom said she couldn't homeschool me because I was too difficult. But I was raised, I survived public school, and I always wanted to homeschool. I knew that in my heart that I would do that. So my kids have been homeschooled. I've recently read this book called Irreversible Damage, and it came out, made a big storm about what's going on in the trans culture in our public schools. And one of the things that I find very concerning about children in public schools, and it not just this trans issue, but like a lot of other things, is the loss of parental rights. When your children go to school, the school has the right to do a lot of things. And I think that a lot of people aren't educated about that, and they don't get educated until it's a big problem. And so I think that like is an ethical issue. Like if you want to raise your children and you're sending them to this place where for hours they are being indoctrinated with all kinds of things, and you don't have any rights. Things happen at schools that parents are not told, and it's very scary.
There used to be a principle called in loco parentis. The teacher stood in the place of the parent in the absence of the parent. But there's a little pushback about that now politically. A lot of places are instituting legislation which gives parents more choice, both in curriculum and in other policy areas. Christina.
One more. I know, and I'm sorry. I was a little, maybe, just harsh at first, but I mean, I grew up in public school. Brendan, we both went to public school. Really, this isn't a public school issue, just like Richard Robot is saying. And to your point, Joan, the ability to help children get along socially, emotionally, it's imperative. The ability to help children dialogue, it's imperative. To help children see others who are different from one another, that's very important. When children are so young and so impressionable, I think it's our right as parents to make sure that we're forming them properly in the early years. And at this time, not when I was in public school, not when even people, 10 years younger than me or 15 years younger than I was were in public school, but at this time, the public school is, similar to what Gus is saying. You're faced with situations that you're not quite, as a parent, you're not ready to introduce that to the young developing brain. But we don't have the ability to prevent that from happening if it's going on in their setting, in their natural setting, where they're supposed to be a setting where we're supposed to trust that they're being fed and given information that's helping their developing brain to learn academics. Academics are what's very important for them to learn. And when you go to a public school today and they bring in with some of the good, other things that are not great, like for instance, I'll just say a friend of mine who's third grader went to health class last year in December. They start teaching sex ed. They start teaching sex ed in first grade.
Right.
And she had to pull her daughter out of that class, and the school said to her, no, you're not allowed to take her out because you would be shaming her apart from her other friends, and she will feel isolated. So now she has to go to school every Monday, my friend, and take the child out of school and sit in the parking lot. And she now has a new school to send her to next year.
I think what has changed, Christina...
So that's not a parental right.
What has changed since I'm much older than you, Joan, what has changed in our peer group is the militancy with which some of these groups are pushing the agenda. Is different from the public school. I'm a proud graduate of Valley High School in New Kensington, Pennsylvania, Valley Vikings. But it's a different world than the one that we grew up in. Let me transition real quickly. I know we're running up against lunch. I'd intended to talk a little bit about the challenges to married life as well. we've got our kids, they're here, we know how they're here, we've confronted issues of education and orientation, even maybe programming them to a certain extent. I just want to share a couple of thoughts about general threats to all of us. I was astonished again last night at the number of hours that our kids reported that they spend on social media. This is like a huge problem for us. The one kid told me he spends up to 60 hours a week on a screen of some kind, whether it's his cell phone or on his iPad or on his computer. 60 hours a week is like, it's a job and a half for most of us. And the content of what they're seeing is just as detrimental as what they're hearing in schools. The images are unbelievable. So what I suggested to them in this season of Great Lent, I used the model of the fasting that we do from food. It's not that we fast from food because it's evil. We fast from food to make us appreciate how good is, but more importantly, as we sing during the Divine Liturgy, the pre-sanctified gifts, it's almost like we fast from food so that we can taste and see how good God is. That's one of the hymns that we sing during the Divine Liturgy, the pre-sanctified gifts. In the same way, the technology in and of itself is not necessarily evil, but they can tithe, if you will. Take 10% of the time that they spend online or looking at a screen and do something else with it. Pray, read the Bible, talk to your parents. I mean, the parents complain all the time that their kids don't talk to them anymore. If they just took a fraction of the time that they were spending on the screens, it can make an enormous difference. And that becomes tied to another value that we try to institute during Great Lent, and that's the notion of almsgiving. The kids may not have an awful lot of income that they can donate to the poor, but they can certainly give some portion of their time both to their parents and their community instead of spending all their time doing this. You know? Go ahead, John. Mary Lou.
I'm sorry. I agree with everything you said, but I see parents doing the same thing that their kids are doing. I mean, they're sitting at the kitchen table or dining room table and they're on their phone or their iPad is on. So if that's the model that the child is seeing, the parent's not going to criticize because that's what they're doing.
No doubt. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you know what the average number of times that a person checks their smartphone is? All of us, teens and kids alike. Put a number on it. How many times a day do people check their cell phones? 20? 100? 100? Hundreds is the answer. People tend to look at their phone more than 200 times a day. And that number of 200 is actually low. I've seen some estimates that go as high as 400, but it's hundreds of times a day. Oh, you can check the weather. That's okay. And kids need the technology to get their homework done. I get that. But they're spending an awful lot of time playing video games and Snapchat and what's the other one? TikTok. And they're going down these rabbit holes. And the point of that is clickbait. These companies know how to keep eyes connected to the screens, and they're monetizing those eyes. It's almost like, you see the movie Matrix, remember the Matrix movie? And all the babies were being used for their energy to keep the computers going, the robots. They're using our eyes in order to power the economy in certain respects. So that's one of the things that I think is a real stress on family life in general. As we talk about family life, though, I'm going to give you a few statistics here, and then I'm going to jump to my screed. Here's my favorite statistic. 90% of families are dysfunctional. 90%. And the other 10%, they're lying about it. I love that statistic. And there are multiple sort of stressors on families, including social media and other things. This is going to be very abbreviated compared to what I was originally planning to talk about, but I'm going to give you some more statistics. 6 out of 10 adult children of alcoholics become alcoholics themselves. If both parents are alcoholic, that number jumps to 8 out of 10 become alcoholic themselves. 90% of sexual assaults occur under the influence of drugs or alcohol. When we send our kids off to college these days, I tell them nothing good happens on a college campus after 1 o'clock in the morning. And there's a reason for that. Not only is there a proliferation of drug and alcohol use, but that's when male libido is the highest. So the combination of a male libido and drug or alcohol use compounds the risk, especially to girls. 1 of 6 boys is sexually abused before the age of 18. When you look at girls, it's 1 of 4. 1 out of 4 before the age of 18. There are on the record right now at least 400,000 registered sex offenders in the United States alone. 8 out of 10 people, I'm going to state this one very carefully because it leads into my big complaint. 8 of 10 Americans gamble. Okay? That doesn't mean that everybody who gambles is an addict, but there are some who do fall prey to addiction. Compulsive gamblers have revealed that the average amount of money a person owed when they first sought treatment for their addiction was in the neighborhood of $45,000. So this is a huge impact on family and family systems. 75% of those people who go into treatment had considered at some point suicide. And out of those people, 17% had actually attempted suicide. Here comes one of my big complaints then. You know how big, y'all know me well enough to know that I'm a big sports fan. It's almost my addiction, if you will. I very often tune in in the morning to the Pittsburgh radio station, just because it's sort of my touch plate with home, and I want to hear what the Steelers and Pirates and Penguins are doing, okay? But I got so turned off this year at the time of the Super Bowl for 2 reasons. First of all, do you know what it costs to run an ad during the Super Bowl? $7 million for how much time, Brendan? For 30 seconds. It's an obscenity that we as Americans are spending that kind of money on something so frivolous. $7 million for 30 seconds. The other thing that's bugging me, and it's really become a problem, is the advertising that goes along with it in those 30 seconds and surrounding sporting events. The gambling sites have gone off the charts. Everybody's got a gambling site now. MGM, DraftKings, ESPN. You could go on naming them for hours and hours and hours, and it's leading kids and adults into a kind of addiction. And I just think it's too much. Now here's the capper. While I was listening to the Pittsburgh sports station last week, as a matter of fact, in anticipation of this presentation, I heard the following advertisement. And surprisingly, it's going to connect the 2 things: the threat to family life, these kinds of addictions, and also the beginning of life issues that we talked about earlier. Female voice, a very appealing female voice comes on for a commercial. It says, "Hey fellas," big come on, "Hey fellas, are you looking to earn a little extra cash? Introducing California Cryobank. Introducing California Cryobank. A sperm bank looking for healthy males ages 19 to 38 who can work in the United States. Never mind any other qualification. The qualification is that you're legally able to work in the United States. Earn up to $1,500 a month by helping others get the family of their dreams." Okay? To learn more and to apply, visit spermbank.com. That's spermbank.com. Earn up to $1,500 helping others get the family of their dreams. That's spermbank.com. How can you miss it? Without regard to the effect of family life, the value of life, the sacredness of life, that's the world that we're operating in right now. So it calls all of us then to be even more dedicated to the Lenten effort, I think, to dedicate more and focus more on the life of God himself. One more comment, and then I'm going to let you guys go have lunch. Hold on.
Since you mentioned advertisement, I challenge everybody to watch any commercial they want and read the fine print at the bottom. It may take you 6 or 7 times watching that commercial to actually able to read it, or unless you can pause your whatever you're doing. But it basically says everything we just said is a lie. I mean, when you read any commercial.
Yeah. The follow-up to all of these gambling sites, when they're trying to lure us in and get us addicted to gambling, as soon as they give you the advertisement and the place to go, then comes a whole string of 800 numbers that you can call just in case you develop a problem, including here in Massachusetts. There's one in Massachusetts as well. So let's all be cautious about that. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Aaron, is it time for lunch? All right, we come back for this. When we come back, I'm going to talk about some end-of-life issues, okay? Thank you all. Let's go eat lunch.